And so welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you here this evening and have you join us for a River Roundtable. And this is Bring Back the Kern's first River Roundtable. And today you're going to get to hear the story of Putah Creek and how in the middle of a major drought, that's right, a major drought, much like the one that you, if you're a Californian, are going through today, diverse community stakeholders were able to work together and achieve things that no one ever even imagined. And you're going to hear some of those special outcomes that happen. But first, for those of you who don't know, Putah Creek is no creek. Putah Creek is actually a major stream in Northern California. It's not small by any stretch of the imagination. And what you'll find so fascinating about the discussion this evening is that after several years of drought in the late 1980s, the majority of Putah Creek actually went dry. And that prompted a landmark lawsuit that resulted in the signing of the Putah Creek Accord, which we're going to talk about tonight and you're going to hear about. And I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking, that's nice, Tim. I'm super glad like Putah Creek got a little water back, but you know, this is Kern County. And Kern, it's different. The Kern River has been dry for a long time. And you know, things are okay, but I'd like you to take a moment just to imagine something. I'd like you to imagine Paris without the Seine River, right? Just imagine that, right? I'd like you to imagine Egypt without the Nile River, or I'd like you to imagine New York without the Hudson River, right? Imagine the loss of commerce, the loss of recreation, nature, business, and even the simple things that you might enjoy, like taking your family out there and spending a birthday or an anniversary or having fun in the river. Now, I'd like you to imagine Bakersfield without the Kern River. Well, unfortunately, if you live in Bakersfield, you don't have to imagine what this looks like. You get to see this every single day. It's how you know and experience most of the lower Kern is as a dry river. And like I said, you don't have to imagine. And in fact, why it matters, we don't even have to calculate why it matters, because this is spelled out in a 2015 report called An Economic Roadmap for Kern County. And this is a 70-page paper that you can go look up, you can explore. And in this roadmap, as they look at our unique community, because Kern's unique, Putah Creek's unique, right? We have unique communities. And one of the authors, there are 4 major recommendations for Bakersfield. Number 4 was to continue to invest in amenities that attract talent, such as recreation and river. And it's not right that residents of Bakersfield, that you have to bike along a dry river path. It's a shame that you have to travel 20, 30 miles up to Kernville to actually enjoy the Kern. But why now, and why the story of Putah Creek? Well, you know, I believe that it's in times of crisis that we can find ways to work together. It's in economic and social and political chaos that you can often find that you actually have some things in common with people who might think very differently than you do. And it's in times of scarce resources that you can actually learn how to work together for the good of everyone involved. And that's why I'm so excited about tonight. That's why I'm excited you're here. And tonight, you're going to hear from Joe Cravoza. Joe was on the Putah Creek Council with it when it was formed and was really closely involved in the fight to restore and protect the Putah Creek, not just now, but in the future from ever going dry again. We've got Kerrigan Bork. Kerrigan is a leading scholar of public trust, and I really want you to pay attention to when you hear those words, public trust, and we're going to dive in and you're going to learn why that's so important tonight. And Kerrigan is an expert in public trust and also Fish and Game Code. And those are 2 laws that were very pivotal in helping restore the flows of Putah Creek. We've also got Roland Sanford. Roland was instrumental in the formation of the agreement, and he's responsible for a lot of its continued success. And he's really kind of gone from being a skeptic to a leading proponent of the Putah Creek Accord. He's currently water manager of Solano Water Agency. And if you're from Bakersfield, your moderator tonight, Richard Bean, he requires no introduction. However, for those of you who are hearing Richard Bean for the first time this evening, what you should know is that as host of Bakersfield Observes, Richard really works with guests and politicians and newsmakers, influencers, personalities who are involved and address topics of interest to you and our local community, your neighbors and your families. The discussions, they're fast and informative. They're always civil. And that's what you're going to get tonight. And with that, let's dive in. Richard, take it away.
Okay, thank you guys so much. Thank you, Tim, and welcome everybody. I noticed some familiar names on the list of attendees here. I saw Leah's name. Hello, Leah. Steve Loftus, some folks of mine are around town. And thank you again. And I'm your moderator. And in all honesty, before Tim came to me some months ago, I had no idea what Putah Creek I didn't know where Putah Creek was. I had no idea what the Putah Creek Accord was. It has been a revelation to me. And it's the first time in my 25 years of living in Kern County that this has given me hope that something can be done with our Kern River. I live here. Some of the panelists live here. I know Tim lives here. And to drive by that dry riverbed for 2 decades and knowing the groundswell of support that it would have in this community to run water down that river and see nothing done has been frustrating, I think, for all of us here. And I think I speak for a lot of people here. So listening to what's happening in Putah Creek and getting these folks on has been really important. So let's get right into it, because this is fascinating. I think we're going to all learn a lot here. Roland, can we start with you, my friend? And could you walk us through a little bit about Putah Creek itself, where it is, how big would you call it a river? The creek seems a little bit of a misnomer, and what makes it unique?
Sure. And well, to start with, so Putah Creek is located north of San Francisco, maybe about an hour and a half, 2-hour drive north of San Francisco. It consists of about a 600 square mile drainage area. And its headwaters are on the east side of the coastal range, actually Cobb Mountain to be precise. And the water flows in a easterly direction towards the Central Valley. It enters the Central Valley near the town of Winters, flows another 20 plus miles to the Yolo bypass, which in turn winds up into Sacramento, roughly near the city of Rio Vista. And Putah Creek, probably a little different than the Kern in the sense that the hydrology, it is very flashy. It's a rainfall dominated hydrology. It can flow torrentially during major storm events in the winter, and frequently there is very little flow in the summertime. There's all significant year-to-year variation. The extremes being so far 1977, when annual flow was only 20,000 acre feet, a little bit less than that. And another extreme, 1983, when it was over 1.1 million acre feet. So very, very flashy, very variable year to year. On average, the annual flow is roughly 350,000 acre feet, which I understand is about a little less than half of what the Kern's average flow is. I think the other thing, and this gets into the context with the Accord, the other part of the story here, is Lake Berryessa and Monticello Dam. Lake Berryessa and Monticello Dam are part of what's formerly called the Solana Project. It is a U.S. Bureau of Reclamation project that was completed in 1959. The water agency has a contract with reclamation for essentially all of the water in Lake Berryessa. And then we also have an operations and maintenance contract for the facility, which we sub out to another organization, Solana Irrigation District. Berryessa is pretty big reservoir. It has a capacity of just under 1.6 million acre feet. And in our case, the annual withdrawals from the lake, unlike maybe Oroville or some other reservoirs, are pretty modest. On an annual basis, you add up out of stream, in-stream uses, lake evaporation, it's about 300,000 acre feet a year. And so in a sense, what we have is a big bank with pretty modest annual withdrawals. And as a result, we are probably better positioned than many to withstand longer extended droughts like we're currently experiencing. So that's a really quick rundown on the system there.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's turn this to Joe. Joe, I don't know when you were mayor of Davis and how this all ties in, but could you give us a quick history lesson and kind of go back to the 80s? What was the state of Putah Creek then before the Putah Creek Council, and what was the mood kind of in the community? What kind of condition was it in the 80s?
Sure. Thanks, Richard, and delighted to be here with all the Bring Back Kern folks and the members of the community. I moved to Davis in 1991. I wasn't mayor until 2010. So all my work with the Putah Creek Council kind of predates my service on the city council. But I was a law student where Professor Bork is now a law professor. And I was very interested in water law, and so started paying attention to the creek as the local creek. I like saying Putah Creek is the most beautiful creek in the world. Everybody in Bakersfield should say the Kern River is the most beautiful river in the world, which it is to you because it is yours. But I would say that Putah Creek was well known. It's our local creek. It flows a little bit south of town because for flood control reasons, it was diverted starting back in the early 1900s to go a little bit further south of town. But it runs right through downtown Winters, which is about 15 miles to the west of us. You'd get down to the creek. It was a little bit forgotten. But it has a beautiful, then and now, expanding, increasingly riparian corridor. In 1988, a group of really bird watchers, the people who were part of the YOLO chapter of the Audubon Club, National Audubon, their conservation committee realized nobody was really paying attention to the creek. Nor were they paying attention to the water issues. They just thought it was a wonderful natural resource that ought to have a little bit of organizing around it. So on February 3rd, 1988, they had a founding meeting and said, heck, let's start an environmental group that looks out for the creek. And that was the beginning of the Putah Creek Council. Coincidentally, it was the day I turned 25 years old. But I didn't get involved in the council till a few years later. But I think what's important is they came together around the creek as a community resource. It wasn't necessarily in any way because they were going to put together one of the more historic, water challenges for in-stream flows in the state of California. The people who were part of that are still very good friends of mine. And they're connected to the university. They were certainly connected to the city council. They were tremendous environmentalists. They were also, without question, very aware of the Mono Lake decision and the efforts of National Audubon Society to increase or decrease the diversions of the creeks that supply the water to Mono Lake. So they were aware of that. The coalition built to some citizens in Winters as well. So it wasn't just a Davis-based group. And the one thing I want to mention, we're going to get to the kind of the legal side of this in a couple of questions, but the city of Davis has a tremendous recreation program. And one of the recreation programs during the summer is Camp Putah. And hundreds of kids day camp on the shore, if you will, of Putah Creek. So probably the biggest connection between families and citizens in Davis is Camp Putah. And the only other thing I'll add to Roland's is 1957 is when the Solano project was built and Monticello Dam went up and Lake Berryessa was created. And then that's what created the new varied flow regime. And at that time, when the Solano project was created, there was no requirement on the project for in-stream flows to really keep the lower 23 miles of the creek wet. And so that's the mood in Davis in the late 80s, and we'll leave it there for right now.
Okay. Joe, I don't know if this is a follow-up for you or for Roland, or either of you just jump in here, but what led to the creek drying up? And what was there, you mentioned it kind of started with that Birdwatchers Club. Did I speak from the Bakersfield perspective, where it is an absolute outcry of people saying we have to do something, which is a whole story we'll get into to later, what a mess it's become. But what led to the problems at Putah Creek? Was it drying up at some point?
Yeah, so let me start this kind of from a community perspective, and then Roland maybe could pick it up from an environmental and ecological perspective. So early 1988, Putah Creek Council is formed, bird watchers, nature lovers, let's enjoy the creek. The summer of 1989 began a 7-year drought. And as that drought hit with no guaranteed flows from Lake Berryessa that had to make it their way through winters and then down to Davis, the creek started drying up. And so these Putah Creek kids camping on the banks were going home to their parents and saying, their parents are saying, you can imagine these conversations. So how was camp today? Well, it was gross. The fish were flapping in the mud. The birds were eating the fish. We saw the fish dying. And if you're a parent, you probably don't want to hear your kid coming home with this, story of them spending time on the bucolic creek, or what you thought was the bucolic creek, down during the day. And so this is what they're paying for their kids to go to summer camp, day camp during the summer. So that got the newspaper saying, oh my gosh, Putah Creek is drying up. The kids were really the ones, sounding the alarm. And the Putah Creek Council then is this group that had no real plans of being part of a water fight, but everybody's looking to the Putah Creek Council saying, so what are you guys going to do? What's the answer to this? And all of a sudden they're the Forrest Gumps or something saying, oh, well, I guess we better do something about this. And they were a sophisticated group, and they did know about the Mono Lake cases. So that's really how it got going. The drought started drying up the 23 lower miles of the creek, and the kids sounded the alarm, and the paper started asking the Putah Creek Council what they were going to do.
Yeah. For the sake of a comparison, I'm gonna roll this to Roland after this question. But was it the Kern River, the dry bed, has become a public nuisance. Basically, we have hundreds of homeless there. We've had muggings. It's riddled with, the bike path is riddled with syringes. There's stray pit bulls. It's a mess. Was Putah Creek ever in that dire a situation where people considered it, this is a threat to public safety and health?
I'll jump in here with just recap a little bit of what Joe just mentioned. It's like, yeah, clearly a severe prolonged drought was a factor, but really at the core of the matter here is the release schedule that was in place at the time and originated at the beginning of the project. It was always designed, or was intended to address downstream prior rights. It would be a stretch to say that it also attempted to address public trust issues or 5930 Fishing Game Code 5937 to any great degree. And so I think at the core of the issue is that, well, that in-stream flow release schedule was never took into account public trust resources, Fishing Game Code 5937. Putah Creek, it doesn't sound, I don't think it, based off the description of what you're saying about the Kern, I don't know if it was ever quite that bad, but I will say that certainly, at the time that the Solana project was built and in following years there had been extensive in-stream gravel mining in certain areas. The channel was really considered more of a flood conveyance channel, and there was extensive vegetation clearing and whatnot, and a lot of trash. And I think as time went on, then the gravel mining stopped. The degree in terms of channel, for flood control purposes, backed off some. There certainly still were garbage dumps here, at certain locations, and even today, actually, maybe there we do have. In fact, we just cleaned up a homeless encampment along the creek here. That still occurs, but maybe not to the degree that you've experienced at the Kern.
Right. Hey, Roland, as a follow-up, could you give us some context on how large a stretch are you talking about? When we talk about the dry Kern, we're talking about 10 miles through town and another 15 on top of that, going out. How big an area are we talking about with Putah Creek?
Yeah, and quite possibly fairly comparable. I mean, the Putah Creek Accord and the portion of the stream we're talking about is, as Joe mentioned, a little over 20 miles. And there were certainly times like in 1990 when the majority of that was dry, at least at some times. So
Okay.
pretty extensive.
Okay, Roland, I want to get into the meat of it now that you were well, you're with an water agency. You hear this kind of groundswell of the public, like the concern over this creek and what's happening to it. You got your own constituents and your own job and your own fulfillment needs. You're looking at that. When this started happening and the conversation turned to the public has a right to access this water too, as well as everybody else. Did you view that? And I'm not asking you to speak for everybody, but generally, was that seen as a hostile action? I mean, something that you would say, hey, we've been, I'm serving my customers fine, and now you come up here and I could have an issue here.
Yeah, I think initially, the water agency stance was, look, we're operating the facility in accordance with the Bureau of Reclamation's standard operating procedures. We're making the releases pursuant to the water Division of Water Rights, the water rights permits and licenses. We're following all of the regulations. It's like, hey, we're in a severe drought. And so I think initially the stance was like, well, yeah, we're in a big drought. I mean, it didn't help that by 1992, Lake Berryessa had dropped to its lowest level since it was filled. And so there certainly was pressure from water users, of course, environmental. So it's coming from all directions, but at least initially the stance was that, hey, we're doing, it's a severe drought. We're following all of the regulations. We're releasing the water. That's the best we can do.
Okay. All right. I'm going to get to Kerrigan here in a minute about some of the legal questions, which are, as Tim alluded to, are really important. But Joe, I want to get back to you as the former mayor of Davis. Can you tell us a little bit about the city politics at the time between you're looking at this potential lawsuit? Should we participate? Should we not? What was that like, Joe?
Yeah. So the rollout, that's a perfect way to set up Kerrigan here. The rollout then, 88, the council's created, 89, the creek starts to dry up. By the summer of 90, the Putah Creek Council tried to buy water, actually, to re-wet the creek. That didn't work. The council then sought an injunction to require minimum flows coming down. And then in 1991, the council filed a formal lawsuit under Section 5937 and public trust, seeking in-stream flows that had never been kind of guaranteed in the original permitting of the Solano project. And that started a slow process of getting your evidence together, raising money, collecting the evidence. And that's not a simple time to put together all the facts. And it took a lot of dedication, a lot of commitment from the council. But part of that was going to the university and going to the city and asking them to join. And I think at the city level, to get to your question, Richard, the city, it's got its recreation down on the creek. It's got a summer, camp down on the creek. This is part of our history and our heritage. Quite frankly, the University of California decided to locate in Davis because the soil is so wonderful. And so the ag campus of the University of California was located in Davis because of Putah Creek, right? So this is part of our heritage. So the city, I think, saw it as a natural. The city cares about environmental issues. And so, of course, we would want our creek to be preserved and protected. The university is, I think, even a more interesting case because it was faculty of the university who said, as the faculty, this is an important research resource, and the university is both a diverter of the water and kind of a user of the science and an enjoyer of the riparian corridor. And so I think for the city, it was maybe a little bit more of a no-brainer to join this environmental movement, but very significant that the University of California decided that on balance, it should join too. And that coalition of all three, an environmental group, a city, a university, that, to some extent, that was our superpower going forward, because it wasn't just, an environmental group. It was a true coalition. And so I would encourage everybody who's part of Bring Back the Kern, what's the coalition? What's the coalition that can come together?
That's excellent. Let's get into the legal stuff, because that's where all the power is. Kerrigan, let's go to you. You specialize in environmental law. We heard Joe talk about something called California Fishing Code 5937. What is it and why is that important?
Great. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me on here. Excited to talk about this stuff. So section 5937 is this piece of the Fish and Game Code. It's been on the books since 1915. It's one of our really old fish statutes designed to protect fish populations as we go about developing water resources in California. And it's also remarkably straightforward for a California law. And essentially it says dam owners have to let enough water go downstream, have to release enough water from their dam to keep fish downstream in good condition. And so you can wrangle about what good condition means, but it's super clear that anybody who owns a dam or operates a dam or really is able to control the water that's released from a dam has to let enough of that water go to keep those fish downstream happy, is the way I like to think about it. And it wasn't enforced for an awful long time in California. Right? This was passed in 1915. And the first time we really see it being enforced is some lawsuits over around Mono Lake. So some of the tributaries to Mono Lake and down on the Owens River. And that really wasn't until the early 1990s. I think the first big decision we get on that is about 1990, kind of right before this lawsuit on Putah Creek gets filed. So it took an awful long time for this to get enforced. And it's generally been enforced not by the state, but by folks like the Putah Creek Council, concerned citizens who step up and are able to assert this law and force folks to pay attention to it.
Kerrigan, what happens if in a case, and I can't speak to the Kern, but you said the statute puts the responsibility that there should be enough water to supply the fish. What happens if all that water is allocated? If deals have been cut and it's being used for other things?
Yeah, great question. And honestly, that's usually the case here in California. An awful lot of our water got claimed. So I don't want to get too water rights nerdy on you here, but you can kind of think of three big groups of water rights. The oldest water rights are water rights that people claimed prior to about 1914, when the Water Board was created. And those water rights don't consider environmental issues at all, don't consider the public trust that we'll talk about it a little bit. People could just go out and claim the water, and you said, this water's mine. You started using it and you got a right to that water. So an awful lot of the water out there has been claimed under those really ancient rights, ancient in a California sense, not in a big picture sense. But that's a situation in the Kern. Most of the rights on the Kern were allocated pre-1900 even, maybe 1901. Then there's a chunk of water rights from like 1915 through 1970s, where there was some oversight by the Water Board, but generally the Water Board wasn't considering the environment when issuing those water rights. And then we've got modern water rights that do consider the environment, do consider public trust. And the California Supreme Court took that question on, the exact question you asked. What do we do when we've got this public trust, these environmental interests that we want to protect, but we also have these really old water rights that have been granted and recognized for a long time? And that was the National Audubon case or the Mono Lake case that people will talk about sometimes. And the California Supreme Court said these environmental interests that are protected by the public trust, those rights get protection, right? It's not possible to have a water right that does not consider those public trust interests. So if you have a water right and it's never been weighed against the public trust, that water right is going to lose water when you start considering the public trust as part of that. And to do the cleanup. The public trust idea is this idea that there are resources that the government is supposed to protect for all of us, right? We are the trustees, or we are the beneficiaries of the trust, and the government is the trustee. And so one of its jobs is to protect that property for us, just like a regular trustee protects the money for the people who are beneficiaries of a financial trust or something.
Right. Kerrigan, okay, I'm not a lawyer, but here's how I would interpret what you said, and I want you to tell me if I'm accurate. Between Fish and Game Code 5937 and the public trust doctrine, is it safe to say that California law comes down on the side of using creeks and rivers for recreational purposes as well as a source for farmers? That is in its essence that there should be room for everybody at the table? Is that what the argument is?
Yeah, so I don't know if I just qualified as recreation. I think, in 1915 when this was passed, these and still today in a lot of places, these fish aren't just recreational. These fish are deeply spiritual for our Native American tribes. These fish are food for an awful lot of folks. This is a cheap source of protein. And these fish were important for industry in California historically, and remain for commercial fishermen a pretty important source on rivers that connect out to the ocean. So it was 5937, courts have said, and the Water Board has said, is a legislative expression of the public trust. Usually what you do is you weigh public trust interests and you weigh private interests in this water and the use of the water, and then you carve some water off for public trust. And what the courts have said is that in this case, 5937 is a legislative expression of how that weighing is supposed to go. And so courts don't have to do a weighing process. Courts just have to implement what the legislature has said is the minimum, which is enough water to keep these fish in good condition. So that's a law professor answer for your question. Yeah. If I had to answer yes or no, I'd say yes.
I appreciate it. All right, let's take a step back. Joe, I'm going to go back to you. All right, we've got kind of the arguments set up. We have the local concern. We got a 7-year drought, with our with the creek. Can you summarize kind of how it led to the trial and take us through the trial of 1996?
Sure. So we kind of worked our way to the trial. We'd built a coalition that was the Putah Creek Council, the university, and the city. And in the spring of 1996, we were finally in court before Judge Richard Park. It had been removed from Yolo County, our county, and moved over to Sacramento County. So we were before a Sacramento County judge in the Sacramento County Superior Court. It's just like where you get called in for jury duty. And the judge really embraced it. He was fascinated all of a sudden to have a water case. I think he's probably dealing with family law and all kinds of other, felonies and misdemeanors going on. And he embraced it. He enjoyed the trial. The Solano water interests put on their case. The city and the university and the Putah Creek Council put on their case. I will add that very important to the Putah Creek Council's case was the fact that first, the law firm of Morrison and Forster agreed to be pro bono legal counsel for us. And then they were actually qualified out and went over to Latham and Watkins. And then someone at Latham and Watkins left and went to Beveridge and Diamond, and Beveridge and Diamond took over the case. So we had tremendously talented legal support. And then the city hired their special water counsel, the university hired their special water counsel. So we had quite a team of attorneys. And at the time, I was the junior water counsel for the city of Davis as I was practicing law right out of law school.
Hey, Joe, let me interrupt. How are we paying for all this?
Well, the pro bono attorneys were doing it pro bono.
Okay.
Now, importantly, after we were successful, they were able to petition the court under what's called private attorney general and say, we did what the attorney general of the state of California really should have done. We stood in the place of protecting the public, and we would like to have fees. And so all three of the firms recovered a very generous fee for representing us. But they didn't know that at the time. They did not know going in that would be the case. And I'm kind of pleased to say too that a few of the firms donated a pretty large amount of that back to the Putah Creek Council because they never really expected to get it in the first place. So we go into trial, and there were actually kind of 4 pieces of water, so to speak, that we asked for. The judge gave us 2 kind of guaranteed flows all the way down to the Yola bypass to keep the creek wet, and flows that would protect the native fish of the creek, a very unique assemblage of co-evolved native fish. But the judge did not grant flows for anadromous fish. And importantly, that's salmon, because we knew of an historic salmon run up Putah Creek. And the judge also did not grant flows for flood flows, because flood flows can be very important to kind of wash out the creek. So we got some, we didn't get all. But I think importantly, and Roland can jump in on this, there was also no drought schedule for the Solano agencies. So, you know, if we got to future drought years, this kind of one size fits all judge ruling, you know, was going to be in place. And I think that was created some nervousness and discomfort for the Solano parties. And so we won, you know, it was successful in that respect. But I think both sides wanted a little bit more. And so we entered into 4 years of negotiations. And by 2000, we reached what we have historically called the Putah Creek Accord. And in that accord, the Solano parties granted us kind of a reduced salmon flow and anadromous fish flow to be added onto the flows that the judge had given. And we granted the Solano parties a flow regime that would be reduced during drought to make sure everybody kind of suffered a bit when water was tight. And importantly, that accord created the Lower Putah Creek Coordinating Committee. And it was then Mayor of Davis, Lois Wolk, future Assemblywoman, future state senator, who on the Putah Creek side said, when we stop fighting about water, we're not going to fight about restoration. And so we're going to make an agreement where the water fight is over and we're going to come together around restoration. And that accord, that Lower Putah Creek Coordinating Committee that brings all the stakeholders together to decide how we're going to make smart decisions to move restoration forward, has been absolutely key. And that resulted in the hiring of a permanent stream keeper who wakes up every morning thinking about how to make the creek better, files, you know, CEQA documents that are creek wide, and so on and so forth. So that's how we got to the accord, you know, from the initial 1991 case.
Okay, thank you. Roland, this is perfect for you here. You represented the Solano Water Agency. Look, you guys were skeptical of this when you went in. 4 years of negotiations, you reached an agreement. I got to ask you, looking back, you know, how hard was that as a water agency to get on board with this? And then now we got the benefit of 2 decades. Are you happy with it? I mean, would you be able to talk to other water agencies and go, you know, don't be scared of this. There's a way to meet in the middle? Or do you think are you happy with the accord?
Actually, yes. Actually, we are happy with the accord. We were certainly skeptical. And particularly with the salmon flows, like ironic, which are probably the most talked about these days. But once the accord was signed, we were committed to, you know, we are fully committed to this agreement, and we're going to do everything we can to honor it and maybe take it even further. And, you know, what the accord has done for us is help in terms of adding certainty for water supply planning. Yeah, there's certainty for the creek, and we know, especially with some of the drought provisions, what that will look like as the drought continues. For water supply planning, I should back up and say that we're also a state water contractor, and unfortunately that water supply is not very reliable. So we need to rely very heavily on Berryessa in drought periods. And so the Accord actually gives us some certainty, which we really can rely on and actually need given our other water supplies. But the other thing, I think, well, two things. One, I don't think anybody had any idea when we signed the Accord, some of kind of the ancillary benefits, community benefits and sociological benefits that would come as a result of the Accord. But the other is that, here we are today with the Bay Delta plan update and voluntary agreements and all of this discussion. And really the Accord maybe for us put us certainly in a much better position today when we're dealing with what's happening with the Bay Delta plan update than certainly some other agencies. So one could almost argue it's like, okay, it was done, what occurred then maybe was 20 years ahead of its time, but certainly where we are today because of the Accord puts us in a better position with that and just general water supply planning.
Yeah. Roland and Joe, or anybody who wants to jump in on this, we talked the other day when we were talking preparing for this about some of the unexpected benefits that came out of this thing. And one of you guys told me something that just was shocking to me. Who mentioned the Salmon Festival?
Oh, yeah, that was one of, so the town of Winters, I think it's now, we had a little hiatus with COVID, but I think this is maybe about the fourth year or so, a little salmon festival. And it's time to, pursuant to the Accord, there is a salmon attraction flow that is released, and the festival is timed so that, hopefully, the pulse, the salmon attraction flow is released and salmon come up. And so that is just kind of, one of the little bit kind of, nobody was thinking about a salmon festival when the Accord was signed. I think when I talk about, sociological analogy I like to use is urban streams. Cities, initially it was like, well, your businesses, everything faced away from the creek. And now with kind of urban stream renewal, you're turning that into a major attraction feature. And to a certain degree, I think that is what has happened with Putah Creek. I mean, the water agency in conjunction with City of Winters and others, helped to develop the Winters Putah Creek Park there, which was a segment of stream, which really was, it was pretty ragged, but it has become a very nice feature for kids. So classrooms that come down to it. And so these were just some of the things that certainly we were not, that wasn't high on our list. We weren't thinking about, but have come out of the Accord.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. In Kern County, a lot of us daydream about what the community would look like if you had a continuous flow of water through town, what it might mean for commerce, recreation, and fish, and all kind of things like that. Could one of you gentlemen kind of look back over the last 20 years and tell me how the revived, restored Putah Creek has changed your community or improved it?
Joe, do you want to take that one on?
Sure. I think that, I think that I just think the presence of the creek is so, it's so much more, amplified, whatever the right word would be, in Davis and Winters. And it's just taking what Roland just said. The Winters Community Center used to have a back door. And then when they redesigned the Winters Community Center, they built this big grass area behind that rolls down to the creek, and they have concerts in the summer where the bands are playing with the creek in the background, right? So you just change everything. I think, Camp Putah now is more vibrant than it's ever been. I know on hot summer days in Davis, let's go to the creek is just automatic. I mean, people are going down there. There's 4 or 5 big, rope swings with people sailing out. Maybe I shouldn't say that. That's probably maybe a public safety issue, but I think it's just more real. And, there's more people kind of, going down in canoes, still respecting private property along the way. But I just think it changes. I think it does change the psychology, and you can go there. And Roland made reference to the fact that there's still some sites that have trash. That's true, but I certainly know that it was getting harder and harder and harder for the Putah Creek Council to find junky spots to clean up during the cleanup. So there is a real sense that wherever you go on the creek now, it's going to be pretty darn nice. And our stream keeper for years and years and years, Rich Maravich, I think, is listening in here. Rich was a godsend and just tremendous. We've nominated him for Saint already. And, we went through a whole program of removing non-natives. There's a wonderful nursery now supported by the Putah Creek Council that so many volunteers go to grow native plants that are then put onto the banks of the creek. So once you've got the water and you've got 20 miles of creek that's yours, the possibilities are really endless.
Awesome. Kerrigan, I want to get you back in here from a legal standpoint. I've listened to you guys here, and from where I sit, I think this is fabulous. I want this to happen here. I want it to happen fast. Let's get it done in 3 years, not 4 years. Let's get everybody at the table. But Kerrigan, where this state is with water now. If I can imagine the response from a lot of water agencies and farmers is going to be, your timing's off. It's a bad time to be talking about diverting more water. You've already impacted us enough. Given all that, is Putah Creek something that realistically Kern County or other areas with these kind of situations can model their actions after?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think these crises periods that we have, these monumental drought periods, that's when things change in California water. It's easy to keep on and pretend like things are good when there's enough water for everybody and we're not fighting about it. It's when things start getting tight that you figure out who's got the right to the water and who's going to get left out to dry. And so that tends to be when these situations really shift. Folks who are kind of involved in the water space talk about California finally deciding to regulate groundwater, and that only happened because we had this monumental drought that ended in 2017. That's what produced the Groundwater Act, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So droughts make things happen. That's what made this change happen on Putah Creek, right? No one was too worried about it when there was a lot of water in the system. It was only when the creek started drying up that we got out there and folks were able to get after it and enforce this section of the law. The law only matters when the law really needs to matter. So I think that drought periods are when you see this action. It makes it difficult. I mean, the pattern we saw in the Putah Creek case is just about the pattern that we see in almost all of these litigations that we see over 5937. You see a lawsuit, the river's drying up, fish are in bad shape, lawsuit gets filed, and you get a preliminary decision from the court or an early decision from the court that says, actually, 5937 applies, you're gonna have to let water go for fish. And that brings people to the table because nobody wants a court hammering out these decisions. The courts, they're great, but they don't know fish, right? And they don't know water the way a water agency knows water. They don't know fish the way a biologist knows fish.
Right.
So once you have that hammer that says, I'm going to make a decision about this, and you probably don't want me to do it, then people come to the table and they can work out the agreements that produce something great, like what we've seen on Putah Creek.
Yeah, guys, we're going to get to the questions from the listeners here in a second, but we're at a point where I have to ask all of you, I'm going to ask all of you to chip in, but help us here. Give us advice. Give the folks in Kern County some advice on what's important. I heard about UC Davis. Should CSUB, California State University Bakersfield, be involved in this? What are the key components we need to take from this if we're going to go down a similar road? Who wants to start? Roland?
I'll start out. Okay, I guess I will. You know what? First and foremost is persistence. I mean, the Putah Creek Accord in some ways is like a Hollywood movie, and that happily it has had a nice ending. But there were 10 years of litigation. There were, many years of negotiations, and probably on all both sides, there were times it's just like, I don't know, this is just, that's it. We're done. And so really, persistence is key, because these things don't get turned around immediately. Kerrigan brings up a very good point about, things get done in the water world when there's a crisis. And when I think back to the Putah Creek issue, it was like, what happened after 1992? Then we started the second half really of the 90s was really wet here. And so the pressure was off on the creek. And ironically, that may have delayed getting to where we ended up, because the pressure was kind of off. But while it was on, it was like, oh my God, we've got to do something now. And so I just the second when Kerrigan was saying that, as painful as it is, it takes a crisis to get anything done in the water world. But I would just say, I'll just throw out perseverance, and I'm curious what the rest of you think.
Okay. Joe?
I think, I guess the first thing I'm going to say is keep it civil, and you're going to be the whole community is in this for the long haul, and Roland and I and Roland's former general manager at Solano County Water Agency, we always got along. We were always respectful. We disagreed with each other. The environmentalists, the city, the university took their stands. And so keep it civil. Everybody's going to be working together. If this is really going to go well, you're going to be working together for the next 20, 25, 30 years to make the Kern great for the city of Bakersfield. And then I think, find your unique coalition. In our case, it was Davis and Winters residents coming together. It was building coalitions with the elected officials who were so important in this. And I hope that elected leaders will, be stepping up in public about this in Bakersfield. But also, just picking up on a theme that Kerrigan mentioned, groundwater is so important. And, if this can be part of a solution, the more water you're letting down the Kern, the more that's going to down percolate some, the more that might rejuvenate your groundwater. Maybe that helps stop subsidence around the city. So think about the broad coalition, the landowners that are going to have more valuable land, the community that's going to have more of a recreation resource, the economic benefits of, for heaven's sakes, go to any city now and enjoy the Riverwalk. Yeah. And, I don't know where I go where the city's not trying to connect itself to a body of water, whether it's the Embarcadero in San Francisco or you're in Seattle or wherever you are. There's these wonderful river walks, small creeks, big rivers, and so on. So I just think the coalition options for Bakersfield are going to be very unique between the landowners, restoration of the groundwater, the environmental values, and, for CSU Bakersfield, maybe Bakersfield City College even as well, the scientific values and the value of some of those scientists there and faculty there and students there to support the case. They're all part of the coalition. It should be a big tent, and hopefully a lot of people are part of it.
Yeah. Kerrigan Bork, I got to ask you as a law professor, is when you look at this from afar and from your experience of water law and environmental law, you look at this going, if the people of Kern County got their act together, this is a slam dunk, is it?
Legally, it sure looks like it to me. I mean, and I think that's one of the take-home messages here is once you realize you're going to lose gracefully and lose fast, so we can get water back in the river. You look at across the board. This has happened. I count probably 10 or 12 times now that 5937 has been applied. I think the biggest case is on the San Joaquin River. There's about 60 miles of that river that were dry. And the NRDC sued the Bureau of Reclamation over that to put water back through Friant Dam and rewater that whole stretch of river. I mean, that's a remarkable change in the ecosystem of a whole range of counties, a whole range of places that are awfully dry. And that fight took a really long time. It took 20 some years before Reclamation finally said, well, you're right. We need to put water in here. We'll put some spring run Chinook back in there. And we got the first returns of those fish, gosh, within the last decade, right? So that's a 20 or 30-year fight. And that makes an awfully expensive fight, which is great for the lawyers. So, I don't good for the students that are on here, but it's not good for the fish, and it's not something that it's not good for the communities that are involved. So I think the faster that people can come to the table and say, hey, we've got this problem and we've got to find a solution for it together, that's the way to do it.
Okay, very good. Before I turn this over to Tim and the questions from the audience, Joe, Kerrigan, Roland, is there anything I have missed? Is there an important point that we don't want to leave on the table that we should know about?
Not for me. I think great flow through the history of this.
Yeah, I'm happy to go to audience questions.
Yeah,
Okay.
likewise.
Very good. Tim, I'll turn it over to Tim McNeely.
Yeah, and thank you, everyone in the audience and our panelists. We've got some incredible questions coming in, some tough ones, some interesting ones, and I can't wait to dive in for these. And first, Kerrigan, we've got a question about, once again, Fish and Game Code 5937, and how do we get people in power to actually enforce Fish and Game Code instead of relying on the public to do it? So how do we get our elected leaders, our people in positions of power to do this, or does it take an outcry from the public? What do you see when it comes to this issue?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's awfully hard to find a right answer to it. We're talking here about 5937, but there's been laws on the books in California that say you have to let fish get around dams, that imply that there's a minimum flow requirement since California became a state. I mean, we're looking all the way back to 1850. There's laws in the books to protect that. And those laws just consistently don't get enforced. And they never have. And if you look at the laws passed by the legislature, every decade, it seems like the legislature says, no, we really mean it. No, we really, really mean it. We especially mean it here. And for a long time, the Water Board didn't think it had the power to do that. Now it recognizes that it does, but there's an awful lot of competing demands on the Water Board. And so in the end, an awful lot of this falls to the public to enforce. And like Joe was talking about, there's fee shifting provisions so that when people step in and do the job of the state, they kind of make the state courts enforce the promises that the legislature's been making for 150 years now. When people do that, then they can recover the fees associated with prosecuting those actions. So in the end, I'm not sure that people will. That the government will, or people in power will. It's going to fall to the members of the public, all of us who are benefits of the public or beneficiaries of the public trust, to step in and protect that trust property again and again.
All right, so it really is, right? We've got to stand up for our rights that we have and ask our elected leaders to actually enforce the things they're supposed to enforce.
Exactly. It's and that the citizen suit provisions that we find are the ways that people are able to use these laws to sue. It's actually based in the Civil Rights Code, because you had the same problem there where the government wouldn't do it, right? And so you had to have people step in to protect their own rights, and we see a similar thing here. It's only by people actively litigating and taking an interest in this that we actually are able to accomplish what the legislature has promised for an awful long time.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And then Roland, I want to talk about the water agency just for a moment. And this is a great question from Alana. And she's wondering, did the Accord actually help put the water agency in a better position in any way? Did the water agency come out stronger or better positioned? And if so, how?
Well, yeah, I think it did, or has. And part of that, I alluded to the Bay Delta Plan update and where things are at now as that process moves forward. It has been helpful. Maybe the Accord was ahead of its time. The Accord also has helped in terms of strengthening, relationships with, other elements of the community, which certainly has value as a water agency. And when I think put us in a better position we're going through another drought now. And I think we're in a much better position to deal with that without the controversy that we had. So in essence, yeah, it has strengthened us politically, I think, as well as just, operationally.
Yeah, and actually, even before when we were talking, you had mentioned that, one of another of the surprises that come out is, people come to you just like we did saying, how did you do this? And now, people are really looking to the water agency and you, like, how'd you work through this? And they want to learn from you. And it's actually kind of increased the profile of the agency. Awesome.
Well, it makes me feel old.
Yeah. Or let's go with wise.
Hey, Tim, I can weigh in on that just a little bit too. And this is something the Supreme Court talked about in that National Audubon case we were discussing earlier. LA had these old water rights and had never considered the public trust. And the court said, no, you got to consider the public trust. That's always been a restraint on these water rights, whether you've paid attention to it or not. And that means that folks who have water rights where the public trust has never been considered have this axe that's kind of hanging over their head. They may say, I've got these rights, they're super secure, but it's been really clear from just a whole host of court decisions that 1914 rights, riparian rights, all of these rights are still subject to consideration of the public trust. And so you end up with a much more definite right once you've considered the public trust. It doesn't stop, it's an ongoing process. But if you've never had to weigh that, if you've never considered the public trust when you're thinking about a water right, that puts you in a bad position.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and actually kind of along this lines, right? As discussed, the Kern rights, they're pre-1914, and there's water that flows year round from Lake Isabella down to Hart Park, but then it's diverted and the river stops flowing, right? The farmers are saying, they require the water for sustainability, for ag jobs, to keep the economy going. And, we've got citizens and other people saying, well, we want the flow year round to enjoy. And so how do you weigh those issues? I mean, why should the status quo change?
Yeah, in part, the legislature's already weighed these issues and they've made a determination that protecting fish downstream of dams is an important thing to do. There's an awful lot that we are willing to sacrifice for irrigation, for protecting agriculture, for protecting land values. And that's fine, right? But this is one of those spots where the legislature's put its finger on the scale and says, no, we think this is really important to protect, right? And there's still an awful lot of room for those other things to go on. As far as what the actual agreement looks like and how you figure out what it looks like on the ground, I think that's something that Roland and Joe are probably in a much better position to talk about, because you don't want law professors and judges making those determinations.
Yeah. Well, right, and Solano County is also very different than Kern County, right? Solano County gets average rainfall of about 14 to 40 inches per year, I believe. Bakersfield, we get about 6 inches per year. So water is very valuable here for the agriculture and for our community, and with things like Sigma coming in and just everything that's going on, right? Once again, how do you kind of work through those issues that are unique to your community?
Well, it's certainly not, just from our own experience, it's not easy. I was just, as the conversation is going on, reflecting on a comment that Judge Park made when he announced his decision. And basically what he said is that, he understood that basically what he was doing was he was reallocating the pie, and that this was going to be painful because now there was another slice of the pie that was going elsewhere. So it's not easy. I think, I think about the Accord and Putah Creek, and yes, there are clearly some differences with Putah Creek and the Kern. I think there are certain elements of the Accord that may be applicable to the Kern situation there. I seriously doubt that you could take I wouldn't recommend taking the Putah Creek Accord lock, stock, and barrel and applying it down there. I think you're going to need to tailor it to the local situation, both politically, environmentally, physically, all of these parameters. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind is and I'm not very well versed in the ecology or hydrology of the Kern, but what realistically is doable, and getting a grasp on that. I mean, there's one thing to have ideas, but then there's reality too. What is the reality there? I mean, that has to be taken into account. It would certainly shape any sort of Accord, that type thing that would come out of this.
Yeah. Well, right. And even another question, right, coming back to just the resources that are available, what can actually be done is, right, it's my understanding that the Accord was actually signed after several wet years, managed to fill the the reservoir. And so did the reservoir size and how full it was impact anything that was going on? Or were you really looking at it more holistically? Or did the situation at the time impact some of the decisions?
Well, I think, quite honestly, we're fortunate in that because of the size of the reservoir and the reliability of the overall supply, that at the end of the day, the Accord did not say force the fallowing of ag land. There are other situations where maybe that would have actually occurred, but because of the available supply and the ability, I think the ability also to minimize the impacts of drought with the supply, that was a huge factor, but that's a luxury that we have that understandably quite a few others don't.
I'd jump in here a little bit and say that, throughout the whole negotiation of the accord, which was, extremely, time intensive for all parties, we were paying attention to the science that the hydrologists were, sharing with us through the whole historic record of rainfall and flows, and the science of the fish protection. And, that was what was controlling, it wasn't the politics. And I think you have to go back to Kerrigan's point too, which is that, if we balance between different factors and we just keep balancing and balancing and balancing, we can balance the environment away or to a very, very minimal position. But as Corrigan says, the legislature has said that the standard for balancing will include fish in good condition. And that's an absolute. That's not a balance. That's what the state is saying in all of this. So there's the public trust resources that have got to be protected, and there's 5937. And I think if you rely on the science of good condition and you look at the hydrologic record, you should be able to find a solution long term. It's going to be tougher during a drought, but I think there's probably ways to negotiate agreements where there can be recognition that when the times get better, the flow through Bakersfield is going to be better. And when there's times that are tight, like they are now, everybody's going to take a bit of a hit. But I don't think that precludes moving forward with a creative, respectful, smart solution for the Kern.
Yeah.
Excellent. And so, coming back, and this is a real quick yes or no, any tribal participation in the Putah Creek restoration at all?
I'm sorry, can you restate that?
Was there any tribal participation from the different tribes or interested parties?
There has been very, very little to date, and I do hope that will be changing.
That's correct. But I will say that there are Native American groups that go out to the creek, and they've actually joined some of the cultural celebrations in introducing the community to weaving and the types of things. There's tremendous Native American colonies along the creek. That's absolutely part of our history. And one of the kind of cultural touch points in Davis was Jack Forbes, a professor on campus, who wrote very, very eloquently about the interconnection, the weaving of the creek and the Native Americans. And so I think in Davis, people were very conscious of the Native American heritage that we were connected to, and to some extent we are absolutely stewards of. But in terms of some direct tribal involvement in the litigation, that wasn't present.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing, and we're getting questions on, is really the role of the stream keeper and how that came about, and what role has the stream keeper really played in keeping Putah Creek healthy and surviving and doing well.
Well, I think I'll jump in right away and just say that I think that has been central to the success here. And I know Rich Mirovich, who just recently retired as a stream keeper, is on, but this is like where we were all very fortunate, because Rich is somebody, has a personality that well, looking at right after the litigation, there were a lot of hard feelings that a lot of landowners had towards the agency, and it was Rich's mannerism and steady hand to help rebuild those relationships. And I will also say that as we were going through the negotiations, and I know that the concept of streamkeeper was brought up and brought into the negotiations, really nobody, the initial feeling was like, well, we're not sure about this position. The HR people had never heard of a streamkeeper, how we do a job description. This is going to be somebody that's probably a junior level individual just starting their career. Rich basically rewrote the streamkeeper position and turned it into a much more elevated in terms of complexity and responsibility than anyone had ever envisioned. I mean, Rich is directly responsible for, upwards of $15 million worth of grant funding to help, do restoration work on Putah Creek. He started very, simply with, cleaning up, dump sites and whatnot, and it advanced onto, I mentioned the Putah Creek or the Winters Putah Creek Park project, a huge restoration project, but he was central there. I think that he earned the trust of everybody, which was critical. So I would say streamkeeper was key. The other thing is money.
Yeah. Let me just put an exclamation point on something here. Nobody will fund controversy. Nobody will fund controversy. And so if you have a streamkeeper and you have a coordinating committee and people have come together, and then you put in a grant application, whether it's the federal government or the state or a private foundation, your chances of that restoration being funded are through the roof if you're united and people know that that project is going to be successful. And so the value of the streamkeeper is bringing people together and putting in these great things. And if you pull this off for the Kern and you have a streamkeeper, you're going to win those grants. There's a lot of money out there for environmental restoration. You're going to get that money. You really are. But you've got to be united and coordinated. And that is what the streamkeeper will bring you.
And how was the funding for the streamkeeper secured? Who pays for that? Was that grant money? And how do you pay for that position?
Well, and that's as a part of the accord, the water agency funds the streamkeeper as well as certain fish, wildlife, and vegetation monitoring programs. We also do additional funding, but the accord specified that that forever now the agency will fund the streamkeeper, fund these certain tasks, and that is something that's also, I think, truly critical because I mean, in economic good times and bads, and agencies all go through them. You need, I mean, programs die because there's no funding. Programs don't advance very far in some cases because there's no monitoring of a success or failure. So that is another key ingredient. You've got to have, a secure funding source for your streamkeeper or whatever, formation of, that responsibility is shaped. As well as just kind of, I'll call it baseline funding for certain activities that the streamkeeper would be performing, whether it's outreach regarding, cleaning up garbage sites or removing invasive species. You've got to have some reliable baseline funding to kind of set that in motion.
Yeah, I know we're out of time, but I really want to jump in here too. And Roland, one of the important things about the accord was that I know this, the Solano County Water Agency had a budget for restoration that they were going to spend no matter what. And so they decided put that money toward the coalition effort that was organized and run by the streamkeeper instead of spending restoration dollars and then having to defend all of their decisions, maybe being attacked or challenged by landowners, the environmental community, whoever you had it. So for Bakersfield and the Kern, I'd really look at the amount of restoration, upkeep, trash, et cetera, money that the county, the city, the water agencies are spending, and think about how much of that could be aggregated into a coordinated program that also goes after more money from, places where there's grants to be had. So there's, in coordinating the dollars around a stream keeper and a coalition effort, there's just so much efficiency to be had in government, and that'll benefit everybody.
Yeah.
Right. So, hey, another question on Fish and Game Code 5937. So, are there any recent examples of it being enforced by out-of-court settlements, consent decrees, or court orders recently? And along with that, the follow-up question was, does Fish and Game Code really apply to the Kern River when we don't have fish like salmon or smelt?
Yeah, so I can talk a little bit about recent successes. There's an awful lot of work going on over in Napa County to rewater a lot of the rivers over there, and that has been kind of across the board successful. I want to be clear. I'm not aware of any cases where someone has sought to litigate 5937 where they've lost. So it seems to be when people bring it into play, they win. There's an ongoing lawsuit on the Santa Maria River right now dealing with Twitchell Reservoir to restore some flows there for steelhead. And in a lot of these cases, you do see some kind of migratory fish, but certainly not in every case. There's an awful lot of inland lakes that have been have had 5937 litigation, or I think there's probably 5 water board orders where they enforced 5937. So the Mono Lake tributaries is a great example of that, right? That's not going out to the ocean. You don't have salmon, or it goes to a salt lake, right? You don't have salmon or steelhead, but you've got fish species there, some native, some not native. And the courts interpreted the law to apply to all those fish species. It's actually really broad. It applies to fish, it applies to the mussels, it applies to the crawdads, it applies to a whole host of species that we might not think of as fish that we find below dams.
Fascinating. Yeah. So once again, I'm really hearing, like you said, right? The legislature has decided this is important and this is worth enforcing, and the decision's kind of already been made. Now is it going to be enforced?
Yeah, exactly right.
Interesting. And another question from Leah. This is a great question too, but she asked, what do you really see as the biggest obstacles, facing our efforts to bring water back to the Kern, and some potential avenues for overcoming them? And I know that's a little tough because you don't know our area, you don't know the local community, but when you think through kind of, once again, the Putah Creek Accord and you coming to that, what were really the biggest obstacles that finally started pushing this thing forward?
Well, I mean,
Go ahead, Joe.
well, I guess I would go back to my, kind of emphasis of, the city and the university and the Putah Creek Council coming together. But ultimately, it was everybody coming together through the accord with the water agencies, and there's landowners that serve on the Lower Putah Creek Coordinating Committee. So, I think once the water user community can accept the fact that the law is on the side of multiple users and 5937 is absolutely on the side of fish, then I think the challenge is kind of creating that coalition of people who understand the science, the hydrology, the fish, the resource, and kind of putting together a working group that'll really start thinking about how this can be a reality. What if the water comes down a little bit further and it goes down into the groundwater, and then that's a bigger reservoir for future years, maybe a few more pumps get added or something like that, so that there's a little more resilience in the overall system. But I think the biggest challenge is putting together the group of people who are truly committed to making the Kern a resource for everybody, and seeing what the local solutions are. I couldn't agree more that the Putah Creek case, the Davis Winters case, is not something just to be imported down to Kern County and Bakersfield. You're going to find your own way, but within the constraints and the guidance of the law that Kerrigan's led. So.
And you know, Tim, just to kind of tear off of what Joe is saying, just thinking about this from a water agency perspective, and it certainly was a mistake that we made early on, is the need to recognize change. And you know, in the early 90s, when all of this started, yes, people were aware of you know, the Mono Lake decision, but I think for us, at least some of the folks here, what really started to, you know, begin to recognize change was in 1992, the CVIP or Central Valley Project Improvement Act of 1992, where now the Central Valley Project, one of the purposes of the project to define was going to be, you know, fish, not just water supply. And that, you know, it took that really started to register with us, but really it is recognizing change. And the sooner you can adapt to that changing conditions, the better off. I mean, that's one of the lessons we learned. So
Interesting.
Excellent. Well, hey, this has been such an informative discussion. I know I've learned a lot. I know our attendees have enjoyed it. The interaction has been fantastic. Kerrigan, thank you. Roland, thank you. Joe, thank you, and Richard, thank you so much. And you want to give us a couple closing thoughts, Richard, on just moving forward and what you're taking away from this panel?
No, my takeaway has all been positive. I love the idea of listening to Kerrigan talk about 5937, the public trust doctrine. I know the need is here. I know the will is here in Kern County. I hope that to Roland's last point about change, you know, I hope and pray that people get around the table and recognize, you know, that we can meet in a civil way that is not going to be this head knocking, that you know, this head banging that seems to be so typical in a lot of these water issues, where, you know, water is gold. We're all after a precious resource. I'm encouraged. I also take Joe's advice to heart, that it needs to be united front. And I think you know, the city, maybe the university, maybe Bakersfield College, certainly groups like Bring Back the Kern. But I'm as encouraged as I've been since the time I've lived here, Tim.
Yeah.
So thank you all.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for giving us some hope, which is what the world needs a lot of right now. And with that, once again, we want to thank you for attending and being here for the River Roundtable. We've got several more planned because, you know, it's not just Putah Creek. There are other rivers where this is happening too. And we want to help make Kern part of that story for you and give you a better community to live in. So thank you all for attending, and thank you to our wonderful panel. And thank you for sharing so generously with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
All right, good night.
Good night,
Good
everyone.
night.